Old Friend Bear asks, you guys are pretty reasonable and realistic about this stuff, so here goes. What can the Jazz do to improve? I mean, not catching a team that's on fire and getting healthy obviously helps. Will they consider moving Gobert? Possible with the current contract, Conley's future, who to draft? I haven't gotten into enough of my draft prep work yet. I'm just an 11th hour crash course guy there. You're not going to draft somebody that helps you if you're Utah immediately. It just doesn't happen. You're not trading Gobert, and it's not because of the contract. I know he signs that massive, I think it was like 206 million. It can be up worth extension. He's a 3-time defensive player of the year who just makes your entire defense. He is a defense unto himself. I think the bigger problem for Utah was its wing defenders I know it's designed to funnel guys towards Rudy Gobert, but when you're playing the best jump shooting team in the NBA or one of the best jump shooting teams, depending on how you feel about the Blazers aren't there anymore, and the Celtics took a lot of jump shots. They're not alive anymore. But the Clippers were a fantastic 3-point shooting team. When you have Kawhi, you have someone who just wants to torch you from the mid range. They were letting guys get by them too quickly, and I think that's been the biggest problem for the Jazz is they need these bigger wing defenders. It was something that we cited earlier or even before the season, and I still think it came to bear. You don't need him as much in the regular season because I think Rudy Gobert can give you a top 5 defense on his own. But when you're facing a team that's going to have time to manipulate their lineups, and then yes, Rudy Gobert can't be responsible for contesting 3-pointers or even getting out to the mid range all the time. But now when you're compounding that with the fact that the Clippers were also downsizing, that starts to, I don't want to say it turns Rudy Gobert into a liability, but it does put him in an awkward situation where there's only so much he can do to impact the game there. And so the two things I would look at is, can you just get a bigger wing defender to throw at, you're not going to get an all-world defender. You're going to be working with the mid-level exception, and that's assuming you're willing to use it. But $5.7 million is the most you're going to spend on a free agent unless you broker a sign and trade, but that gets all, they don't really have a ton of assets themselves, but then they would also be hard capped, which is tough if you want to bring back Mike Conley. I will say on the Mike Conley front, pay him, bring him back. But you don't want to give out a damaging contract from a team perspective. But I think what we also saw earlier on in the Clipper series was that he's kind of mission critical to keeping Rudy Gobert involved on the offensive end. When you just look at who's going to find Rudy Gobert most efficiently or look for him on his roles, I think he's just better equipped to do that than Donovan Mitchell, which is why he's such a huge part of Utah's success. So definitely bring back Conley. You're not trading Gobert. The other thing that I think they need to do, though, is you need to give yourself the option of going small. I know you don't want to pull your $200 million man in those situations, but if it's down the stretch and you see that it's becoming a problem, it would be good to have someone who can play some small ball 5. And is that, is Rudy Gobert's friend, Nicholas Batum? He's going to be a free agent. Would he consider signing in Utah? That's someone who can give you those minutes while also helping you with your wing defense. He really doesn't qualify for the athletic part, though, of that. Otto Porter Jr., someone that Utah, we can all say confidently, has long been enamored with, dating back to his, I think it was 2017 free agency. And I believe they were supposed to be interested in him if he was going to get bought out by Orlando, which never happened. He's going to be looking to reboot his stock. Maybe he wants to go somewhere that can promise him a starting spot, which Utah clearly cannot. And also, I want to make this clear, Otto Porter Jr. has not been good, aside from the injuries and questionable partying during a pandemic. But the injuries, the offense has been off for him. I would just assume he'll shoot better in Utah when his role is simplified compared to what's happening in Chicago and Orlando. But those are like the level of players that you're looking at with what Utah can spend. And I would say go out there and get someone who can give you those minutes, at least some more explosive minutes as a wing defender. David Nwaba is a name I thought about. It's you need to go after like a Jay Crowder. I'm not trying to troll here, but he would be the perfect player for this team. And there aren't a ton of those guys, especially ones that are bargains, just sort of floating around the free agency markets. But that's what you're going to have to do, is make those moves on the margins. And you need to also give those guys more looks during the regular season, because you can't just all of a sudden go to the postseason and decide like, oh, all right, we're gonna go this route. You want to get a feel for what they're really able to give you there. I expect the Jazz to look largely the same. If there's something they can do, though, diversify your your wing rotation or even just your front court rotation. It'd be better if you can fold that player into one, like I said, and Otto Porter is probably the best fitting slash best actual option that they could get given what they could spend. It is interesting though, because I know Utah was injured. Mike Conley only making his debut in that game 6. Donovan Mitchell, I know Mark Jackson kind of suggested that he was faking his injury. He was not faking his fucking injury. That was bothering him throughout the series. And uh, so if you're healthier, you probably beat the Clippers, you think. At the same time, there's really no excuse. You blew a 25-point lead. Uh, like in that game, and you also lost the previous game when they didn't have Kawhi Leonard. There's just, you were missing Mike Conley as well, but Rudy Gobert, Donovan Mitchell, Joe Ingles, Bojan Bogdanovich, that team is better, at least should be on paper, than a Clippers team that's headlined by Paul George and has Reggie Jackson and Nick Batum. Fantastic stories this season, by the way. And I know it'll get people into the conversation of these guys maybe not playing as well as they should be and in smaller markets, only to end up in a flagship glamour market and start playing better. Reggie Jackson was just genuinely injured in Detroit all the time. They built a pretty formidable offensive attack at one point around his pick and roll wizardry. So his really isn't a surprise. Nick Batum, yeah, he cratered in Charlotte before he was basically yanked out of the rotation last year. Don't really know what that is, but that was just sort of a resurgent season from him. That being said, like those are the guys, Marcus Morris, when you're looking at, and Terrence Mann, who's been fantastic, like the Jazz should have won that series, even as banged up as they were, when you're just looking at the talent level. And so not the greatest matchup of them because the Clippers could go small. You do have to go into this offseason, though, I think asking some pretty tough, really existential questions about your identity and what you can do to change it and whether you believe that this team is, championship ready as is. And I believe it is. I just think there needs to be some smaller tweaks, or maybe it's, be more aggressive. And is it time to shop a Joe Ingles? Do you think if you're bringing back Conley that maybe you can shop Bojan Bogdanovich, who I know a lot of people aren't crazy about his contract? He's still probably just closer, but he shot 50% on pull-up threes in the playoffs this year. So there will be a team when you look at the 2 years left on his deal. If you really wanted to move him, 2 years, a little bit under $40 million. I don't know what you could get for him, but Joe Ingles was entering the final year of his $13 million deal. He'll definitely be attractive. You do have Derek Favors' deal. I think that player option, though, will scare some teams away. He's about 2 years and a little under $20 million left, the final of which is a player option. I would probably argue that Jordan Clarkson's contract might be the hardest to move, and he was fantastic this year, but he's just such a wild card that unless you're dead set on just having him be that bench scorer who's going to come in and just throw up shots without having a conscience, which there's a level of importance to it. Just the 3 years on that at roughly, $13 million on average, that gets a little fickle for some. So if you really wanted to make a splashy trade, it's one, as I said, not going to be Gobert. You're looking at an Ingles or a Bogdanovich would be my guess there. So I just don't know what you can get with those guys because, every team is on the hunt for the wings that I was sort of just describing. And while you do have at least another wing to offer in turn, it's just like you look at the free agency market like this, you just look at the wing market in general. There aren't a ton of guys who could be traded. And sometimes when you're looking at this, it's just outside the Utah's asset range when you're looking at trade candidates. Maybe Reggie Bullock is someone that they could look at in free agency would be really good for them. He's probably better against smaller wings, though. And again, when you only have the mini MLE, like the Knicks should be willing to pay that. And he, in my book, is probably going to get the full mid-level. I just don't, the ready option made isn't there. Is it a Torrey Craig? Or that would really help you. And are you willing to play him? So I actually think Utah, while there's not going to be a ton of change, it is kind of an important offseason because they're so close, but they're just clearly not there. And you can say, if they were fully healthy, Mike Conley's not getting any younger. These injuries happen after playing an entire season. So you can't just necessarily bank on being healthy. And you could even say guys who haven't really had injury problems a ton. I know Bojan Bogdanovich missed some time last year, but he's not getting any younger. Ditto for Joe Ingles, of course. That was a longer answer on the Jazz than I expected to give, but they're actually really fascinating to me.